Melissa, so we did a super fun event this week. We had the self-awareness journey live.
We did. It was super fun. I loved it.
It was funny because we have been thinking a while, like, how else can we engage with our tribe, right? And we've got our newsletter that you can sign up for. We've got the podcast, but it feels really one way, right?
Yeah.
It's just like we throw stuff out there in the universe and some people comment on Facebook, but um, it's just kind of like a one-way conversation, it feels like
Right.
sometimes.
Which is the exact opposite of what we really want.
Right. So we thought, hey, why don't we do this thing that we call TSAJ Live? We'll just like spin up a Zoom call, invite everybody to it, see what
Right.
happens.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Yep.
was great.
And it was great. And the topic was even more great because we talked about advocating for yourself, right?
Yes, the question we posed to the folks that came was how good are you at advocating for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked you that question right off the bat.
Yep.
And then you asked me that question, and I was like, oh crap, I'm not prepared to answer questions on this thing.
See, we didn't lie. We really don't prepare for this stuff very well. Well, we're preparing all the time, but maybe not as intentionally as we should in those moments.
I think it's better when it's just on the fly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we talked about advocating for yourself, which I think is a great topic. We felt we should do a podcast on this topic because what I thought was great is like the things that we came into that conversation with,
Right.
right? I have my little notebook and I've got a bunch of bullet points written down about what I think we should talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But what's awesome is the folks on the call brought all sorts of other perspectives, which I thought was awesome.
They really did. And you know what else I was so, I don't even know the word, but I was so honored and touched about was the legitimacy of people's comments. How everybody, we had 25 people on the call roughly.
Yep.
And the number of people that were willing to comment authentically right off the bat, it just felt so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just loved it. And especially the topic, because how well do you advocate for yourself? Like we would automatically go to a place that says, oh, you advocate for yourself in these external moments, when you want a new job, when you want to win something or get a project or something like that. We went to the place of work, but then the conversation became so meaningful as it talked about how when we don't advocate for who we really are on something personal or something internal, how that whole energy shifts into something completely different than positive.
Yeah. Right. So let's jump in. So,
Yeah, let's do it.
like, I'm just going to ask you again, how good do you think you are at advocating for yourself?
I just can't remember. Just kidding.
Yeah, and your answer better be the same as it was on Wednesday.
Oh, no pressure. I have a squirrel memory. I would say that I answered in twofold and I do still feel this way. So it's a good thing I answered truthfully. That's what I always tell my kids. Just tell the truth, then you don't have any stories to remember.
Right.
But I think when I'm advocating for myself or something that's related to business or something I feel fully resourced in, like if I'm advocating like in a proposal where I'm getting a new client or I'm, suggesting something in my professional life, I feel very comfortable advocating for it. And I think there's an element of, I know it's going to help other people too. I didn't say that on Wednesday, but I think that that's true. It's like I can advocate because I know it's what's best for me, but I really know it's best for other people in this scenario. So it's not a problem. And I actually really enjoy doing that. However, if I'm honest, if it's something that I feel like I'm not getting, like if it's at home or my personal life or something like that, I start to feel like, why am I not? I start to feel lacking in confidence. And then I can't, or I don't feel
Yeah.
good about how I do that. So it's very situational. And I actually never understood that until we had that conversation.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I really didn't. How about you?
Self-awareness from the self-awareness journey.
Exactly.
Well,
We should check that place out.
So uh, I, like I said, I was like strangely unprepared to answer that question. Um, but I actually thought about it quite a bit over
Mm,
the past couple of days because I was like, I felt like I was on the spot. And what I
yeah.
was trying to explain on Wednesday was that I don't think I like I'm not, I'm fairly passive a lot about a lot
Hmm.
of things, right? So I don't often just get out there and be like, "Hey, I need this,"
No.
right? I'm not out there
Hmm.
pushing my energy out like that. And what I was trying to explain is that I think the way I advocate for myself is in a more passive way, and I don't want to say passive aggressive, but it's probably possibly edges on that, like sort of like I need some time to myself, so I'm just gonna like take that time. I won't even maybe even ask for it or say
Hmm.
I need it. I'll just be like, okay,
Yeah.
now I'm just going to go
Disappear.
retreat into the basement, right? Or now I'm just
Retreat.
going to go like sign
Retreat.
up for tennis and go and not really tell anybody or just
Yeah.
say, hey, now I'm going to tennis, right?
Yeah.
So, like, that was an interesting thing. And then the other thing I was thinking about was years ago, especially when we did work events, I'm very introverted, so I need this like recharge time
Right. Yep.
when when I'm out there talking all day, I need to recharge by myself, and I didn't realize that for a long time.
Mm.
But now I know that. So one way I do vocally advocate for myself is for during work events. I will tell people like, "Hey, I'll work the trade show all day, but then I have to go to my hotel for like an hour before we go out to dinner. So do not schedule a dinner like right after the the floor closes because I will be an ass, and I don't think any of us want that. So so I would say as I've understood my own personality and my own wiring
Yeah.
better,
Yeah.
I am actually more comfortable saying like, "Hey, I need this time," right?
Right. Hmm.
And uh, even though I tried to put her on the spot and she wasn't taking the bait, my wife was on the call, right?
she
And
was she was so cute.
but I think in our relationship, she's obviously super supportive and she understands some
Yeah.
of those things I need, right?
Hmm.
So what's nice is she knows that sometimes like if I'm working on a project and I just like part of me when I'm in a project, I can't
Yeah.
get it out of my brain and I just like need to finish part of it.
Yeah. Yep.
And she just kind of knows like, oh, JJ's like in that mode where he needs to go get that project out of his brain or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So what's nice as our relationship, but that used to be kind of a problem, right? She didn't really
Hmm.
understand
Yeah.
like maybe
Yeah.
why I needed this time,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
I think, what's interesting about all this conversation are the feelings behind that. So, like, that's the state when you recognize something, it's like that. Well, I guess, now that I'm thinking about this, I'm learning that this is my response to needing to take care of myself. But what was so interesting to me on our call, and I've actually thought about it a lot since, has been the level of emotion that's behind it and how much guilt we have for for asking for our basic human need. Like what
yes.
you're describing is a very basic core need for you. It's not out of selfishness, it's not out of getting something over someone else. It's just simply a need for you. It's not a want, it's a need.
Yeah, but it feels selfish. That's the thing.
And that's what
Is it
everybody
totally
talked
feels
about.
selfish? Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And
Like, why am I putting my needs above other people, right?
yeah. Yep. And then all
But
this guilt washes in, and then mad. Then you get mad about it.
yeah.
Not you, but generally, that's that pattern. It's like we start feeling like we really need something. We just really need something. And then we don't say anything. We don't want to say anything. And it builds and builds and builds. And we start to, because we don't want to say anything because a lot of people on the call talked about, well, my parents were like this, and this is just how it was in our house.
Yeah, like it's like a childhood thing. It's like a upbringing
A
thing, right?
wiring. Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
hardwired since you were really little
Yeah.
to not be selfish. Don't take more than your share. There was a
Hmm.
lot of that. And wow, it's just
Yeah.
so amazing that that just runs as an undercurrent without us even really noticing how much that affects our basic caretaking of ourselves.
Yeah. That's that's super interesting. I mean, the number of times I told my kids to share or not be selfish, right? It's like hundreds and hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And that is now programmed into them. And maybe for many of us to such an extent where it's harmful, right? It's not helpful. It's actually, we
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
putting ourselves almost too low,
Yeah.
right?
I think too, for me, yeah, yes, and I think for me, everything is on a continuum. I think what makes the difference, and not to bang on the drum that I bang on all the time, but self-awareness is really the key here, because if you understand that that's a process that was in your house when you were a child,
Mm-hmm.
it came from a good place. Everybody meant well with that
Mm-hmm.
process. And by ignoring your needs to the point that you hold on to that process because you were told to, without actually going in and going, well, does that really apply in this situation? Is
Yeah.
that true?
Yeah.
And having that awareness about your own internal dialogue is so critical, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say that some of that early childhood stuff was about very basic things like a finite number of Legos
Yeah,
that we
right.
have in the house or something, right?
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but
Yeah,
as
that's true.
adults, when we're interacting in our universe, and you and I, talk about we're in a universe of abundance,
Yeah,
then there is plenty for everybody, and the the idea that you have to be so scarce on the resources
yeah.
isn't um, really the helpful mindset.
No, and
But
it's
it's
actually,
interesting when you apply that right to yourself, right?
yeah, I know.
Right to your own need for something like sleep,
Yeah, or
right?
happiness, or
Mm-hmm.
something as basic as happiness and
Yeah.
being content. How we can go from that, you're right, that abundance mindset to that lack mindset, and
Mm-hmm.
how we apply it to emotions too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's super interesting. The thing that you talked about with advocating for yourself that I really loved, and a couple of people mentioned even after, was this idea of reactive advocation and proactive, right?
Yep. Right.
So,
Yep.
like an example of reactive would be like, you know, I don't know, I've been up with the kids 3 nights in a row. I'm dead tired. I need, someone else to deal with the kids tonight, right?
Right.
I need to be able to get some sleep. It's like that one's like really in your face, right? Because we've probably all experienced like lack of sleep. Um, but that's reactive, right? Like these things happened, and now you've been so drained or pushed out of center that you have to. It's like your breaking point.
Yeah, you're at a almost fight or flight piece by that
Yeah.
point.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that one's super common for people to recognize, right? Because we've all been
Yeah.
at that breaking point at some point, and you
Right.
have to step up and advocate for yourself.
Right. Right. Um, the that when we went into that conversation, and even right now, the first thing that's coming up for me is how worthiness, our own sense of worthiness,
Mm.
is directly tied to our ability to advocate for ourselves
Mm-hmm.
early in the process, not when we're so far gone that
Mm-hmm.
the advocating sounds harsh and defensive.
Mm.
There's a real difference. Like in your example, because it's such a good example and it's such an easy one without a lot of guilt, or, I mean, well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's guilt around it, but like, yeah, a young couple has kids, and for 2 nights 3 nights they aren't sleeping well, and so one spouse is up 3 nights in a row,
Yeah.
and they're doing it maybe because they feel obligated.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other one works and I don't want to bother them, or or they had a migraine today, and or they had a tough day, and I'll just do it.
Yeah.
And that starts to collect. It starts to collect, right? And then by night 3, you're banging into walls. You're so tired. You can't see straight. You have a stomach ache, a headache. You feel dull. You can't think. And you start to get mad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is my spouse letting me do this?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, we
why
talked
aren't
about that,
they?
how that can push into resentment, right?
Totally.
So when it might start off well-intentioned,
Yep.
like, hey, I'm going to take the baby at night because, my spouse works.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like grinds and grinds, and you get more and more tired.
Yeah.
That well-intentioned idea flips into resentment,
Straight up resentment.
which is not which is not where you want to be, right? That wasn't
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
intent, but that's where you ended up.
Right. And so if the emotion of resentment is tied to advocating for yourself, it sounds totally different. It feels totally different, because
Yeah.
then there's fight. Then there's something that
Yep.
you're fighting about, and there really is nothing to fight about.
Yeah.
If you think about it earlier in that same exact scenario. But it's really interesting. And I think that when people start to have that resentment, it's also tied to, I must not be as good as,
Mm.
Or I'll be selfless. I'm going to be the bigger person here. I don't really think I should, and I don't really want to, and I'm really, really tired. And, they should be the big person because I'm okay, aren't I? That's the self-talk, I
Yeah.
think, that starts to
Yeah.
happen. And that's when you start to feel like I'm not as good as, and then you start to feel, is that what they really think? Don't they think I'm good enough? Why can't
Yeah.
they? And then boom, that resentment starts.
Yeah, like you become the martyr, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting. That following that line of logic and that train of feeling
Yeah.
is really interesting, because then when you think about it, a lot of times culturally, I feel like saying that you advocate for yourself is sometimes not positive,
Right.
right? Like like again, it might sometimes come off as selfish, but when you follow that line of thinking that we just went through, you're like, wait, it's not selfish. It's actually like more healthy for these relationships,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
So I think that's an interesting bit to uncover for people to think about when they feel selfish. The collateral damage can be
Yeah.
worse than
Yes.
what they thought.
Yes, exactly
So,
right. Because then those emotions are really amped up, and you can end up having fights with people, or it is. Don't you think it's kind of interesting? Like, it's sort of on a continuum, right? The extreme versions of both don't feel very good and aren't easy to watch
yeah,
in other people or in ourselves. Yet that continuum is a very normal. Like, that's all really normal. Like, having a hard time, building your own self-worth. Like, it's okay for me to do that. Like, that's very, very healthy. And yet if someone spends all their time doing that, then they become like that person. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't watch that person in this meeting. They're so over the top.
right.
Right? There's
Yeah,
that
yeah.
to the extreme. Oh, that person needs a little help, and they're just not asking. And and that person is starting to get kind of crunchy. That's the word I always use. That person's really crunchy now because they're way off the deep end
Yeah.
of not asking, and now they're wrapped around the axle really bad. And
Yeah.
everyone that they touch and everyone they talk to, it's a thing. It now becomes between those two people.
Let's talk about being proactive. Like, we talked a bit about proactive, and the great example for proactive advocating for yourself
Yeah.
came in the form of asking for a raise at your job,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like, most people probably can recall that feeling of okay, I think I've been working hard. I've been here quite a while. I feel like I deserve a raise. I'm gonna prepare myself to walk in my boss's door and advocate that my hard work and excellent output and everything deserves a raise.
Ah, I'm so scared.
And everyone freaks out.
Well,
Well, it's like it does. You have like there's a lot of emotion when
totally.
and anxiety and excitement. Like there's a lot going on when you're standing at the threshold of that door.
Yeah, and fear. There's fear
Yep.
again. Fear that you might not be good enough, fear that that they don't have enough to give you what you want, fear of the unknown. Yeah, there's all kinds
Yeah.
of fear. And how about the story Dawn gave us in that group where she was giving the example of being a new young employee and how in that environment they had to share a computer.
Oh yeah.
Two new people had to share one computer. And the boss came through and said, well, what's it going to take for you guys to get more productive? And she sat right up, even as a young new employee, and said, you want us to be more productive? How about you give us each our own computer?
Yeah.
And they did.
And for all the kids listening, this was like in the 80s when computers were like a very rare thing.
I was picturing a big, huge
Right.
monitor. Yeah,
I
exactly
know.
right.
We'll get you into a computer. The semi truck will be here next week.
Oh, that's
But that's
funny.
interesting. This preparing yourself to advocate in that proactive way.
Yes.
It's a whole different set of feelings.
Yes.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a whole different set of feelings, but you go into it sort of in with a different approach, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Different feelings, different emotions, different energy. And, I'm always the one beating the drum that says people read your energy before they hear your words. People constantly are checking out how you're showing up before you even talk. They're listening to your body language. We've said that, body language represents 86% of your communication. So if you're coming in with a happy, enthusiastic anxiety, people feel that. And that's
Yep.
kind of fun to see that with some people sometimes. If you come at it with anger and resentment, like I'm really mad you're not doing that, people aren't listening to your words. They're watching you're angry and they're suiting themselves up for protection.
Yeah. So, what tips did we get for proactively advocating for yourself?
Oh,
Do you
do
remember?
you remember?
I wasn't really listening, to be honest. I'm just kidding. Well, I think we had another like young professional on the call, right?
Yeah.
And I think what she was talking about was, it felt like it was moving around like the you said confidence, right? There was some stuff around the confidence thing and the not being sure and
Right.
like should I advocate for yourself? I'm not, or myself
Yeah.
like
Is
is
this
it the right
appropriate?
time? Is it appropriate? Yeah,
Yeah,
right. Trying to
yes.
figure out what those interactions should look like in a professional
Right.
context.
Right. And her feedback was almost more like sit back and wait. Don't be unpopular. Don't stand out. And I think the group consensus was like, it's fine to stand out. It is fine to ask. And if something isn't okay, if you ask with that good perspective, you'll understand why. You'll either get what you're looking for, or if it's a no, you'll have a better understanding of why. So it's not getting in your own head and telling yourself the story before you even ask.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a young lady that worked for me for quite a few years. She came in like very junior, and she worked in sales, and I don't know, maybe like she'd been there for like a year, and like she like kept on asking for raises.
Oh.
Right? To the point where it was like sort of annoying her manager, right?
Yeah.
But for me, like that's okay, right? Like in my company, want to make sure it's very clear, like the relationship between like the employee and the company, it's like gotta work for both parties, right?
Right, yeah.
Like I don't want
Right.
this thing where like employees don't feel supported, they don't
Yeah.
feel like they're paid enough or paid what they're worth or anything like that. I mean, there's like
Yeah.
limits on our budgets, right?
Right.
And we
Right.
have to
Right.
get everything balanced out, um, but I don't want that to. I want that to always be a conversation that people feel safe having,
Right.
right? But she would ask all the time, and I thought it was really interesting because she did a great job of saying like, "Hey, like you asked me to do this, I overperformed here. This is why I think I deserve a raise," and it was great. And while it annoyed her manager, I talked to him quite a bit about it, and it's like it's okay. Like
Right.
let her do that. That's great. That's
Yeah.
actually a good skill she has. It's a great skill to have in sales.
Precisely.
Ultimately, she ended up going to find another job because like we just didn't have a space for her for where she wanted to go,
Yep.
which was totally fine. It's great
Exactly.
that she was at our company for a while, learned some
Right.
skills and moved on, right?
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
sometimes in those professional settings, I feel like advocating for yourself, um, if again, there's some toxic cultures out there, so I don't want to
Yes, of
say
course.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I would say in general, my experience is that it's not bad to advocate for yourself, and watching those, looking out for those spots where there's a power imbalance, right? Employee, employer, there often feels like there's a power imbalance.
Yes. Almost parent-child style.
Right. And understanding and really a lot of the feelings you have when you would go in and ask for a raise, I think come from that power imbalance more than like, you just, should you be compensated more, like anything performance wise. It is so often more about the power imbalance feeling than it is anything else.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's about the feeling. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes, you might advocate for yourself and something might happen like a new career is, and I'm not saying like you would get fired, but like,
No, but
like it would be like clear, like,
uncovers.
well, I've hit the end of the road here. It's
Yeah.
time for me to find a new path.
And I think
right?
that's what you're saying is that's all fine. And
It's all fine and it's
I
all
agree.
part of it.
It's all
And
part of it. And that's
it-
how you grow your confidence. And that's how you
Yep.
grow who you really are and understand yourself is by being able to get those conversations that you're having in your mind out
Yep.
into the room with people who can help establish your next step, establish who you are, validate your own beliefs about yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really good. Speaking of advocating,
Yeah.
guess what
Uh-oh.
we want to do?
What do we want to do?
the listeners of this podcast to please go sign up for our newsletter. Remember, we almost forgot
yeah.
again.
That's so funny. We talk over and over about how we're bad at marketing
Yeah.
and self promotion.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, you know what we should do? We should, right in the middle of the pod, ask everyone to sign up for the newsletter. And then we forgot because we
Yeah.
were so
Right.
into
The conversation.
So everyone should stop right now,
Yes.
go to selfawarenessjourney.com,
Yes.
theselfawarenessjourney.com, and sign up for a newsletter. That would be awesome. If you're
That's-
driving, do it after you stop.
Right. And why do we want people to do that?
Because it helps us communicate with everybody. Because right now, if you're listening, it's just like a one-way thing.
Yeah.
We, it's hard to reach you, and we would love to
Yeah.
just share more.
Yeah. And I think also we've got a lot of cool things that we're going to be doing further. We're growing the self-awareness journey, and for us to be able to connect with you more personally would be absolutely fabulous.
Yep. Well stated. Well advocated. Nice job, Melissa.